He was a teenager who became emperor, not through military merit or direct inheritance, but through a conspiracy orchestrated by his own grandmother, who bought the loyalty of an entire army with gold and cunning. Thus, at just 14 years old, Elagabalus, also known as Elagabalus, was thrust onto the throne of the Roman Empire like a ticking time bomb. His rise to power wasn't a coronation, it was an open-air scandal. In a matter of months, he transformed the sacred heart of the empire into a circus of excess and uncontrolled desire. The imperial palace became a kind of hedonistic temple, where traditional norms were trampled on by the whim of pleasure. Elagabalus didn't rule like an emperor. He lived like a god of chaos. His reign, though brief, became a dark legend marked by provocation, extravagance, and the absolute transgression of all limits. The Roman throne ceased to be a symbol of order and became the wild stage for his wildest fantasies. For 4 years, Rome wasn't an empire. It was his personal plaything and his ruin. What most shocked the world about Elagabalus wasn't his way of governing. It was his way of life. His obsession with sex knew no bounds. He never repeated his partner. He knew no fidelity, and he seemed to feed on desire like a drug. He slept with men, women, slaves, gladiators, nobles, and even prostitutes, without distinction. He was an insatiable devourer of bodies, sensations, and scandals. Evenings in his palace began with elegant drinks and speeches among senators, but ended in mass orgies where power, pleasure, and dignity blurred. It is said that he had hundreds of lovers at the same time just to satisfy his carnal appetite, transforming every corner of his court into an uncensored erotic theater. For the Roman morality of the time, this was not only immoral, it was an open threat to the established order. But his madness didn't end with sexual excesses. He also believed himself to be a living god. Yes, literally. He claimed to be the reincarnation of an Eastern solar deity, the god Elagabalus, and he wasn't content with worshiping him in private. He forced all of Rome to bow down before him. He built a monumental temple, the Elagabalus, and forced the Senate itself to accept this new deity as part of the sacred pantheon. He was no longer just an emperor. He was a messiah unto himself, a god crowned by delirium and absolute power. Imagine the most powerful men in Rome, senators, generals, magistrates, all on their knees, not before traditional god, but before a black stone, a rock, a sacred symbol brought from the Syrian desert, which Elagabalus forced to worship as the earthly manifestation of the sun god. And at the center of the ritual, he, dressed in golden robes that gleamed like fire, made up like a sacred actor, wearing a golden tiara that looked like a divine crown. He presented himself as the only bridge between mortals and the celestial universe, not as an emperor, but as a prophet incarnate. For the historian Dio Cassius, his behavior was a height of contempt for Roman tradition. He lived like an oriental king, luxurious to the point of excess, thirsty for pleasure, surrounded by rituals and oddities incomprehensible to the Roman mind. And it wasn't just a lifestyle, but the sensorial impact. His perfume was so strong and cloying that some courtiers fainted. The banquets were straight out of a demented dream. Flamingo tongues, ostrich brains, tiger claws served as delicacies. Every dinner was a spectacle of extravagance, a challenge to the established order. But his political insolence was even more dangerous. He didn't just ignore the Senate. He humiliated it. He publicly declared that the institution should be decorative, a useless ornament in the empire. And when the senators dared to make a formal request, Elagabalus responded with sealed boxes filled with excrement, an insult so grotesque that not even Rome's enemies would have imagined it. His cruelty also left a chilling mark. On one occasion, he organized a macabre dinner party. He tied his guests to a giant water wheel and, as they slowly turned, exposed them to fire. He was a demented emperor, yes, but also an artist of sadism. And each of these acts brought him, little by little, closer to an inevitable end in broad daylight. With the Roman forum packed with citizens and senators, Elagabalus appeared wrapped in translucent silk, made up like an otherworldly priestess, surrounded by Rome's most famous courtesans. And without flinching, he proclaimed that he too was offering his body out of divine devotion. It wasn't a symbolic act. It was literal. He declared himself a sacred prostitute, an erotic servant of the sun god, breaking every written and unwritten rule of imperial dignity. His obsession with femininity was unprecedented. He offered enormous fortunes to any doctor capable of performing a complete physical transformation on him. He wanted to be a woman, body and soul, centuries before the world could even imagine such a thing. And behind it all, like a complicit and powerful shadow, was his mother, Julia Soemia. She not only supported him, she drove him on. She was his confidant, his ally, and according to many, his ritual partner, even in the most secret palace orgies. Mother and son, dressed in feminine robes, officiated ceremonies as if they were gods incarnate, fusing power, sexuality, and spirituality into a single image that Rome could neither understand nor tolerate. Although she married 5 times, yes, 5, none of those marriages were for love. Her true heart belonged to Jericles, a slave-turned-charioteer, whom she loved so intensely that she named him her official husband and proclaimed herself as queen. In another equally intense story, she fell in love with an athlete named Aurelius Sodicus, whom she called my husband in public, without fear, without filter, without apology. These decisions scandalized the elite and shook the foundations of Roman tradition. The generals viewed him with suspicion, the Senate with horror, and the people with a mixture of fascination and fear. Because Rome wasn't just losing an emperor. It was seeing its most sacred symbol, the throne, become the stage for a spectacle that challenged everything the Republic had ever stood for. For Elagabalus, gender wasn't a cage, it was a disguise, a tool of provocation, of personal exploration, and of open defiance of all that Rome held sacred. He didn't just dress as a woman at private parties. He did so in public in temples, during religious rituals, and he did so with chilling conviction. He wore embroidered robes like a queen of the East, pearl necklaces that cascaded over his chest like luxurious waterfalls, painstakingly coiffed wigs, and makeup so detailed it erased his imperial visage, transforming it into a living play. Every gesture, every glance, every laugh was calculated to appear as feminine as possible. But that wasn't the most disturbing part. When night fell, the most powerful emperor in the world left the palace, not escorted, not disguised as a god, but like just another prostitute. He disappeared into the filthy alleys of the slums, sat in windows like sex workers, and offered his services to strangers. Many didn't know they were standing before the man who ruled the world. And most shocking of all, he paid some to reject him. Yes, he sought humiliation, rejection, theatrical pain, as it were all part of a twisted ritual where he blended absolute power with a deep need to surrender to contempt of others. The historian Dio Cassius recounts that Elagabalus begged his doctors to physically transform him into a woman. He pleaded for a surgery that was impossible at the time, a total bodily change, motivated not by vanity, but by identity. Something absolutely unthinkable in an empire where men were supposed to represent order, war, and reason. For many Romans, this was no longer an eccentricity. It was a heresy. He wasn't just destroying his people's sexual morality. He was challenging the pillars of gender, power, honor, and virility upon which the entire empire was built. And he did so from the highest throne, with a painted smile and a crown that looked more like a mask. Rome wasn't ready for such an emperor, and perhaps the world isn't ready yet. In a Rome where the masculine ideal was almost sacred, iron virility, iron discipline, and the unquestionable power of the paterfamilias. Seeing the most powerful man in the empire behave like a sacred courtesan was a scandal of divine proportions. For many senators, Elagabalus was not only dishonoring his office, he was invoking the wrath of the gods upon all of Rome. Every effeminate gesture, every eccentric ceremony, every new scandal was not just a provocation. It was a crack in the foundations of the empire. His obsession with sensuality, feminization, and extreme pleasure was interpreted as the definitive decline of imperial power. Some saw him as a crowned demon, others as a madman disguised as a prophet. His relationship with the people was unstable. While some were attracted by his extravagance, the vast majority considered him a danger to the stability of Rome. And while the people murmured, the soldiers seethed with rage. Elagabalus had cut their bonuses, neglected their needs, and squandered the state coffers on religious rituals, ostentatious temples, and fickle lovers. Worse still, he displayed open contempt for military discipline, as if the legions that kept Rome alive were merely extras in his personal play. The tension grew like a silent fire. And just as the flame was about to explode, his own grandmother, the same woman who had placed him on the throne, decided it was time to end the show. Julia Misa, an expert in the art of intrigue, saw that the empire was crumbling and hatched a lethal plan. She convinced her grandson to adopt as his heir his cousin Alexander Severus, a boy barely 12 years old, beloved by the people and trained to be everything Elagabalus was not: sober, intelligent, and moderate. At first, Elagabalus agreed, but soon the poison of suspicion seeped into his mind. He began to see traitors in every shadow. He isolated Alexander, increased security, and even attempted to assassinate him. But it was too late. The Praetorian Guard, his most faithful shield, had turned against him. Those same soldiers who had once brought him to power with shouts of victory were now silently plotting to cut off his head. And this time, there would be no disguises or rituals to save him. On March 11, 222, the empire exacted its toll. Elagabalus, Rome's most scandalous emperor, was betrayed by the very people who had once crowned him. Without trial, without mercy, without warning, the Praetorian Guard stormed in and brutally stabbed him and his mother. He was only 18, and his end was as ruthless as his life had been provocative. Their bodies, mutilated and without dignity, were dragged to the streets of Rome amidst the laughter and jeers of the people. The emperor's blood stained the stones of the Forum as if he were a common criminal. There was no funeral, no mourning, not even a tomb. Their remains were thrown into the Tiber River, as if Rome wanted to erase every trace of their existence. For many, it was a just punishment. For others, it was a brutal warning of what happens when power indulges in the darkest pleasures without any control. And yet, Elagabalus left a mark that never faded. He was called a madman, a monster, a sacrilegious man, a pervert, but he was also one of the few who dared to break all chains. Those of body, those of gender, those of religion, and those of imperial power itself. Who was Elagabalus really? A young man corrupted by excess? A victim of his time? Or a living symbol of absolute freedom who frightened a society obsessed with order and tradition? The truth is that many of the stories we know about him, the orgies, the self-humiliation, the desire to change sex, come from writers who hated him. Stories written decades later with political and moral agendas. Therefore, not everything that is said can be taken as absolute truth. Perhaps Elagabalus wasn't as monstrous as he was portrayed, or perhaps he was even more so. But what no one can deny is that his story continues to baffle the world almost 2,000 years later. And now that you've seen this wild journey through one of the most puzzling figures of the Roman Empire, tell me in the comments, what impacted you the most? Would you dare to spend a single day in his court? If you're fascinated by these types of stories, subscribe right now and ring the bell, so you don't miss any of our upcoming historical crazies. And don't leave yet, because right now on the screen, I'm leaving you a video that reveals the muddiest secrets of ancient Rome. Click here, and let's continue to uncover the past together.